Hello everyone, welcome to the Daily English Skills channel. Today we will learn together about the story of courage and solidarity. The story goes that in 1781, General Washington and General Rochambeau of France locked up British General Cornwallis in Yorktown. With the French fleet blocking escape routes, Allied forces surrounded Yorktown, leading to Cornwallis's surrender and marking a decisive victory in the American Revolutionary War. Regarding the specifics of the article, we will go into detailed lessons together.
Chapter 1: Dawn of a New World. The year was 1607, and the promise of a new beginning beckoned across the vast Atlantic Ocean. In the heart of England, whispers of an untamed land filled with boundless opportunities spread like wildfire. Among those who heard the call were a diverse group of settlers, brave souls seeking freedom from religious persecution, adventure, or simply a fresh start. They gathered at the docks of London, their hearts beating with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as they boarded the weather-beaten ships that would carry them to the New World. The journey was grueling. For weeks, the settlers endured the relentless waves, cramped quarters, and the ever-present threat of illness. But through the fog of uncertainty, they held on to hope, their dreams of a new life driving them forward. Finally, after months at sea, a cry rang out from the crow's nest, "Land ho!" The settlers rushed to the deck, eyes wide with wonder as the dense, green coastline of Virginia came into view. It was a sight that filled their hearts with both relief and awe. Their new home, at last. Stepping onto the shores of the Chesapeake Bay, the settlers wasted no time. Under the leadership of Captain John Smith, they began the arduous task of establishing their first colony, which they named Jamestown. The work was backbreaking, and the land was unforgiving, but their spirits remained unyielding. They constructed rudimentary shelters, planted crops, and fortified their settlement against potential threats. Yet, the greatest challenge was still to come. The settlers soon realized that survival in this new world required more than sheer determination. They needed the knowledge and cooperation of the land's original inhabitants, the Powhatan Confederacy. Initial encounters were tense, marred by mutual suspicion and misunderstanding. But as the harsh winter set in, and food supplies dwindled, the settlers had no choice but to reach out. It was during these dire times that an unlikely friendship began to blossom. Pocahontas, the curious and courageous daughter of Chief Powhatan, ventured into the settlement, her presence a bridge between two worlds. She brought gifts of food and taught the settlers vital skills to thrive in their new environment. Through her, tentative alliances were formed, and a fragile peace was brokered. As spring arrived, the once struggling colony began to flourish. Fields of maize swayed in the gentle breeze, and new structures rose from the ground. The settlers, now hardened by their trials, looked upon their creation with pride. Jamestown stood as a testament to their resilience and the dawn of a new chapter in their lives. But the echoes of this new world carried both hope and uncertainty. The settlers knew that their journey was far from over. They had taken the first steps on a path fraught with challenges and opportunities, a path that would shape the future of a nation yet to be born. And so, with hearts full of determination and eyes set on the horizon, they braced themselves for the trials and triumphs that lay ahead in this untamed land. In this new world, where dreams clashed with reality and cultures intertwined, the story of America began, etched into the soil by the hands of those who dared to dream and endured to build. Chapter 2: Seeds of Revolution. The sun rose over the bustling streets of Boston in the spring of 1765, casting a golden glow on the cobblestone streets and wooden buildings. The air was thick with the scent of the sea and the hum of commerce, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. The British Crown, deep in debt from its recent wars, had turned its gaze to the American colonies, seeking to replenish its coffers through a series of taxes and acts. The most incendiary of these was the Stamp Act, a decree that taxed every piece of printed paper the colonists used, from newspapers to playing cards. The news of the Stamp Act spread like wildfire, igniting outrage and defiance among the colonists. In the taverns and meeting halls, whispers of rebellion began to take root. Men and women from all walks of life voiced their grievances, their voices rising in a collective cry for justice. Among the most vocal was Samuel Adams, a fiery orator and master of persuasion, who saw the act not just as a financial burden, but as a symbol of tyranny. It was in this atmosphere of discontent that the Sons of Liberty emerged, a secret society dedicated to protecting the rights of the colonists and fighting British oppression. Their meetings were held in the shadows, in hidden rooms and back alleys, where plans were laid and oaths of loyalty were sworn. The group's emblem, a tree with deep roots and widespread branches, symbolized their growing strength and unity. One crisp autumn evening, the Sons of Liberty gathered in Boston's Green Dragon Tavern. The room was filled with the scent of ale and tobacco smoke, and the murmur of hushed conversations. Samuel Adams, his eyes blazing with conviction, addressed the crowd. "We stand on the precipice of history," he declared. "The time has come to rise up against the chains of oppression. We must show the Crown that we will not be subjugated. We demand liberty, not as a gift, but as our right." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Among the crowd was a young silversmith named Paul Revere, whose steady hands and keen eye for detail made him a master craftsman. Inspired by Adams' words, Revere took on a new role, that of a messenger and spy for the Sons of Liberty. He used his skills to create intricate engravings that spread the revolutionary message, and his swift horse to carry news and plans between the colonies. As resistance grew, the British response was swift and brutal. Redcoats patrolled the streets, and dissenters were imprisoned. But the colonists' spirit remained unbroken. The tipping point came on a cold March night in 1770, when a confrontation between British soldiers and colonists turned deadly. The Boston Massacre, as it came to be known, left 5 men dead and fueled the flames of rebellion. In the wake of the massacre, tensions reached a boiling point. The Tea Act of 1773, which granted the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales, was the final straw. On a crisp December night, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the icy waters. The Boston Tea Party was a bold act of defiance that resonated throughout the colonies. The British Parliament responded with the coercive acts, intended to punish Massachusetts and deter further rebellion. Instead, these acts united the colonies against a common enemy. Delegates from 12 colonies convened the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia, where they debated the course of action. The seeds of revolution had taken root, and the colonists were prepared to fight for their rights and their future. As the chapter closes, the reader is left with a sense of impending conflict. The stage is set for a struggle that will test the mettle of the American people and shape the destiny of a nation. The seeds of revolution have been sown, and the winds of change are about to sweep across the land, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of a fledgling country yearning for liberty. Chapter 3: The Midnight Ride. The chill of April 18, 1775, settled over the town of Boston like a shroud. The streets were quiet, but the air buzzed with unspoken tension. Inside the modest home of Paul Revere, the silversmith turned patriot, the flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls. Revere's heart pounded as he received the urgent message: British troops were preparing to march on Concord to seize colonial arms and arrest revolutionary leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Revere knew that time was of the essence. The fate of the revolution could hinge on his ability to warn the patriots in time. He swiftly donned his riding cloak and boots, then dashed to the stables where his trusted horse, Brown Beauty, awaited. The mare snorted and pawed the ground, sensing the urgency of the night's mission. With a final check of his saddlebags, Revere mounted Brown Beauty and spurred her into the night. The sound of hooves echoed off the cobblestones as he raced through the darkened streets of Boston, heading toward the Charles River. At the river's edge, he met fellow patriot William Dawes, who would take a different route to ensure the warning spread far and wide. The boat ride across the Charles River was perilous, with British patrols watching the waters. The moonlight glinted off the waves as Revere and his companions rowed silently, hearts pounding with every creak of the oars. Safely on the other side, Revere mounted his horse once more and galloped into the countryside, his destination clear Lexington and Concord. Revere's journey took him through small villages and isolated farms, where he pounded on doors and shouted his urgent message, "The regulars are coming! The regulars are coming!" Lanterns flickered to life in windows, and the sleepy hamlets stirred with sudden activity. Men grabbed their muskets and hurried to spread the alarm, while women and children prepared to support the effort in any way they could. In Lexington, Revere found Adams and Hancock at the home of Reverend Jonas Clark. Bursting through the door, he breathlessly delivered his warning. The two leaders, realizing the gravity of the situation, quickly made plans to flee deeper into the countryside. Revere, his duty far from over, continued his ride toward Concord. As Revere galloped along the moonlit roads, the night took on an eerie stillness, broken only by the rhythmic thud of Brown Beauty's hooves. Suddenly, a shadow loomed ahead British officers, intent on stopping any messengers. Revere pulled up sharply, but it was too late. Surrounded, he was forced to halt. The officers questioned him, their tone menacing, but Revere remained resolute. Though they detained him briefly, he managed to convey the urgency of his mission to passing patriots before the officers released him. Meanwhile, William Dawes and a third rider, Dr. Samuel Prescott, carried on the mission. Prescott, having evaded capture, reached Concord and sounded the alarm. The militia, known as the Minutemen, sprang into action, preparing for the inevitable clash. The dawn of April 19, 1775, brought with it the echoing sounds of musket fire as the first shots were exchanged at Lexington Green. The Minutemen, though outnumbered, stood their ground. Word of the skirmish spread rapidly, and by the time the British reached Concord, they were met with fierce resistance. The battles of Lexington and Concord marked the beginning of the Revolutionary War, a conflict that would test the resolve and spirit of the American colonists. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the fields and forests of Massachusetts, the magnitude of the night's events became clear. Paul Revere's midnight ride had galvanized a fledgling nation, turning a spark of rebellion into a full-blown revolution. The echoes of hoofbeats in the night signaled the birth of a new era, where liberty and courage would forge the path to independence. Revere returned to Boston, weary but triumphant, knowing that his actions had helped light the flame of freedom. The ride, fraught with peril and driven by the hope of a free and just society, became a legend and enduring testament to the power of one man's courage in the face of tyranny. Chapter 4: A Declaration is Made. The summer of 1776 in Philadelphia was hot and humid, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of blossoming independence. The streets bustled with activity as delegates from the 13 colonies converged upon the Pennsylvania State House, now known as Independence Hall. Inside its hallowed walls, men of diverse backgrounds but common purpose gathered for the Second Continental Congress, intent on determining the future of their fledgling nation. In the dimly lit hall, the delegates took their seats, the creak of wooden benches and the murmur of hushed conversations filling the air. At the head of the room stood John Hancock, his resolute gaze sweeping over the assembly. Among the delegates were towering figures like Benjamin Franklin, the venerable elder statesman, John Adams, the fiery lawyer from Massachusetts, and Thomas Jefferson, the soft-spoken yet brilliant thinker from Virginia. Each carried the weight of their colony's hopes and dreams upon their shoulders. As debate commenced, the room buzzed with impassioned speeches and fervent discussions. The question of independence was fraught with peril, declaring it meant severing ties with the most powerful empire in the world and plunging into the uncertainty of war. Yet, the abuses of the British Crown, from unjust taxes to the quartering of troops, had pushed the colonists to the brink. The tipping point had arrived, and the call for liberty grew louder with each passing day. It was on June 11, 1776, that the Continental Congress appointed a committee of 5 to draft a Declaration of Independence. This committee included John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston. They convened in a modest room on Market Street, where, after much deliberation, it was Jefferson who was tasked with crafting the initial draft. Jefferson retreated to his lodgings, a small brick house where the creak of the floorboards and the flicker of candlelight were his only companions. Seated at a simple wooden desk, he dipped his quill into an inkwell and began to write. The words flowed from his pen, capturing the essence of the colonists' grievances and their unwavering belief in the principles of freedom and equality. He wrote with urgency, each stroke of the quill a testament to the enormity of the moment. In his draft, Jefferson eloquently articulated the natural rights of all men, the transgressions of King George III, and the colony's right to seek independence. "We hold these truths to be self-evident," he wrote, "that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." His words were a clarion call for justice and a bold assertion of a new political philosophy. The draft was presented to the Continental Congress on June 28. Over the next few days, the delegates scrutinized every word, debating its content and making revisions. Despite the sweltering heat, they labored tirelessly, driven by the gravity of their task. Finally, on July 2, the Congress voted in favor of independence. The following 2 days were spent perfecting the document, ensuring that it would stand as a timeless declaration of their resolve. On the morning of July 4, 1776, the final version of the Declaration of Independence was adopted. The delegates, their faces marked by exhaustion and exhilaration, gathered to sign the document. John Hancock, with his distinctive flourish, signed first, his bold signature a defiant gesture toward the crown. One by one, the delegates added their names, each signature a pledge of their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. As the news of the declaration spread, bells rang out in celebration across the colonies. In taverns and town squares, colonists read the words that marked their new destiny. The Declaration of Independence was more than a document, it was a proclamation of their collective will to be free, to govern themselves, and to build a nation founded on principles of equality and justice. The echoes of July 4, 1776, reverberated far beyond Philadelphia. The Declaration inspired not only the American Revolution but also movements for freedom around the world. It was a testament to the power of words and the enduring human spirit, a beacon of hope in the struggle for liberty. As the chapter closes, the reader is left with a profound sense of the courage and conviction that fueled the birth of a nation. The Declaration of Independence, born from the minds and hearts of visionary leaders, set the stage for a new era of self-governance and unyielding belief in the rights of all people. Chapter 5: The Struggle for Freedom. The scent of gunpowder hung heavily in the air as the first light of dawn broke over the rolling hills of Massachusetts. The year was 1777, and the American Revolution had entered a grueling phase. The fledgling Continental Army, composed of farmers, merchants, and patriots from all walks of life faced the seasoned might of the British Empire. The stakes were unimaginably high, with the hope of a new nation resting on their weary shoulders. Among the soldiers was Nathaniel Greene, a Rhode Island blacksmith who had exchanged his hammer for a musket. His hands, once calloused from shaping iron, now gripped his weapon with determination. Greene's heart pounded as he prepared for battle, the resolve to fight for liberty and his comrades fueling his courage. Alongside him stood soldiers from every colony, united in their quest for freedom. The harsh winter at Valley Forge tested the mettle of these patriots like never before. General George Washington, their steadfast leader, watched over his troops with a heavy heart. The camp was a scene of unimaginable suffering. Ragged tents provided scant shelter against the biting cold, and many soldiers lacked proper clothing and shoes. The frozen ground was stained with blood from their cracked and bleeding feet. Despite the dire conditions, Washington's presence was a beacon of hope. His unyielding spirit and unwavering faith in their cause inspired the men to endure. The arrival of Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a Prussian military officer, brought a glimmer of optimism. Von Steuben, with his booming voice and rigorous drills, whipped the Continental Army into a disciplined fighting force. His training instilled confidence and cohesion, transforming the ragtag group into a formidable army. Meanwhile, the tide of war was shifting. In the forests of upstate New York, the Battle of Saratoga unfolded with dramatic intensity. General Horatio Gates led the American forces against the British under General John Burgoyne. The dense woods echoed with the crack of musket fire and the clash of bayonets as the two armies clashed. The Americans, using guerrilla tactics and their knowledge of the terrain, managed to encircle Burgoyne's forces. The pivotal moment came when Benedict Arnold, a once heroic but later infamous figure, charged into the fray, rallying the American troops with reckless bravery. His actions turned the tide of the battle, leading to Burgoyne's surrender on October 17, 1777. The victory at Saratoga was a turning point, convincing France to officially join the war on the side of the Americans. The French provided much-needed supplies, naval support, and troops, bolstering the Continental Army's chances of success. Across the ocean, in the grand halls of Versailles, Benjamin Franklin, the sagacious diplomat, negotiated tirelessly. His charm, wit, and intellect won over the French court, securing vital alliances and resources. France's entry into the war shifted the balance of power, bringing hope to the American cause. Back on the battlefield, the struggle for freedom raged on. In the South, General Nathaniel Greene, no relation to the blacksmith Nathaniel, employed brilliant tactics to harass and weaken British forces. His strategy of attrition, drawing the British into exhausting marches and skirmishes, wore down their resolve. The British, led by General Cornwallis, found themselves increasingly frustrated by Greene's elusive maneuvers. The culmination of these efforts came at the Siege of Yorktown in 1781. American and French forces, under the joint command of General Washington and General Rochambeau, laid siege to Cornwallis's troops. The siege was relentless, with artillery barrages pounding British defenses day and night. The sight of the combined American and French forces must have seemed like an unstoppable tide to the beleaguered British. As the days wore on, supplies dwindled and morale plummeted within the British ranks. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis, realizing the futility of further resistance, surrendered. The sight of British soldiers laying down their arms to the strains of the world turned upside down was a moment of profound significance. The long and arduous struggle for independence had reached a decisive victory. The news of Cornwallis's surrender spread like wildfire, igniting celebrations across the colonies. The American Revolution, a seemingly impossible dream, had become a reality. The sacrifices and hardships endured by countless patriots had forged a new nation, one built on the ideals of liberty and self-determination. As the chapter draws to a close, the reader is left with a deep appreciation for the relentless struggle that defined the American quest for freedom. The courage, perseverance, and unwavering belief in a better future carried the colonists through the darkest of times. The struggle for freedom, marked by triumphs and tribulations, laid the foundation for a nation that would continue to strive toward the ideals upon which it was built. Chapter 6: Unity and Discord. The smoke of battle had barely cleared from the fields of Yorktown when the newly independent states of America faced an equally daunting challenge: forging a nation from 13 distinct colonies with differing interests and identities. The year was 1781, and while victory over the British had been secured, the task of uniting these states under a single government proved to be a Herculean effort. The Articles of Confederation, ratified in 1781, were the first attempt to create a unified government. However, the Articles had significant flaws, chiefly their inability to establish a strong central authority. Each state retained its sovereignty and independence, leading to a loose confederation with limited powers. This fragile structure was immediately tested by economic hardships and internal strife. In the bustling port city of Philadelphia, the Continental Congress met in a stately brick building, their debates often spilling late into the night. The delegates, weary from years of war, now grappled with questions of governance. Figures like John Dickinson and Richard Henry Lee argued fiercely for states' rights, while others, such as James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, envisioned a stronger central government. Amidst this political turmoil, the issue of unity was put to the test in western Massachusetts. The farmers, struggling under crippling debts and high taxes, found themselves on the brink of ruin. Led by Daniel Shays, a former captain in the Continental Army, they took up arms in protest, their demands for economic relief and fair treatment falling on deaf ears. Shays' Rebellion, as it came to be known, erupted in the summer of 1786, with angry mobs storming courthouses and shutting down debtor trials. The insurrection struck fear into the hearts of the fledgling government. If a group of farmers could challenge state authority so effectively, what hope was there for a united nation? The rebellion underscored the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, prompting calls for a more robust framework of government. The winter of 1787 was bitterly cold, but it brought with it the promise of change. Delegates from 12 states, Rhode Island abstaining, gathered once more in Philadelphia, this time with the intent of revising the Articles. What began as a mere amendment process soon transformed into a bold endeavor to draft an entirely new constitution. The Constitutional Convention, as it came to be known, commenced in May, with George Washington presiding over the assembly. In the hallowed halls of Independence Hall, spirited debates ensued. James Madison, with his meticulous notes and visionary ideas, emerged as a key architect of the new Constitution. He, along with other Federalists, argued for a balanced system of government with checks and balances. The proposed structure included a bicameral legislature, an independent executive, and a judiciary, each branch designed to prevent the abuse of power. But not all agreed with this vision. The Anti-Federalists, led by figures like Patrick Henry and George Mason, feared that a strong central government would trample individual liberties and state sovereignty. The Great Compromise, brokered by Roger Sherman of Connecticut, sought to bridge these differences. It proposed a Senate with equal representation for each state and a House of Representatives based on population, a structure designed to balance the interests of both large and small states. The issue of slavery, a dark shadow over the convention, sparked heated arguments. Delegates from the northern states, where abolitionist sentiments were growing, clashed with those from the southern states, whose economies depended on slave labor. The Three-Fifths Compromise, a deeply contentious solution, counted 3 out of every 5 slaves for both representation and taxation purposes. It was a bitter pill, reflecting the profound moral and political divisions of the time. After months of intense debate, compromise, and revision, the Constitution was signed on September 17, 1787. The document, a product of both visionary ideals and pragmatic concessions, now faced the daunting task of ratification by the states. Federalists, including Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay, penned the Federalist Papers, a series of essays advocating for the new Constitution. Their arguments, published in newspapers across the states, articulated the need for a strong but balanced federal government. Anti-Federalists countered with passionate objections, fearing the loss of individual and state rights. The debates were fierce, but gradually, momentum built in favor of the Constitution. Key states like Virginia and New York, after much deliberation and the promise of a Bill of Rights to safeguard individual freedoms, agreed to ratify. By June 21, 1788, New Hampshire became the 9th state to ratify the Constitution, ensuring its adoption. The following year, the first Congress convened in New York City, the new nation's temporary capital, and George Washington was unanimously elected as the first President of the United States. His inauguration, held on April 30, 1789, symbolized the dawn of a new era. As President Washington took the oath of office, the ideals of unity and discord continued to shape the young nation. The Constitution, a living document, would face numerous tests and interpretations, evolving with the country it governed. The journey from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution marked the difficult but necessary path toward a more perfect union. As the chapter concludes, the reader is left with a deep appreciation for the complexities and compromises that forged the United States. The balance between unity and discord, federalism and states' rights, liberty and governance, would define the American experiment. The fledgling nation, built on the principles of democracy and the rule of law, embarked on its journey with both hope and uncertainty, its future shaped by the enduring quest for liberty and justice. Chapter 7: The Founding Years. The early years of the United States were marked by both optimism and uncertainty as the fledgling nation navigated its path forward under the leadership of George Washington. The year was 1789, and the capital city of New York bustled with the promise of a new beginning. As the first President of the United States, Washington faced immense challenges in establishing a stable government and earning the trust of a diverse populace. In the majestic Federal Hall, where the first Congress convened, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Elected representatives from the states gathered to define the structure and functions of the federal government outlined in the newly ratified Constitution. The Capitol rang with impassioned debates as lawmakers tackled issues ranging from finance to foreign relations. At the heart of these deliberations was Alexander Hamilton, Washington's Secretary of the Treasury and a staunch Federalist. Hamilton, with his visionary economic policies, sought to stabilize the nation's finances and establish its creditworthiness. His ambitious plans included assuming state debts, creating a national bank, and imposing tariffs to promote domestic industry. These initiatives sparked fierce opposition from anti-federalists like Thomas Jefferson, who feared centralized power and championed agrarian ideals. The debates over Hamilton's financial program culminated in the Compromise of 1790. In exchange for Southern support, Hamilton agreed to relocate the nation's capital from New York to a more centralized location along the Potomac River, a decision that would ultimately lead to the founding of Washington, D.C. This compromise laid the groundwork for future political negotiations and demonstrated the delicate balance of power between federal and state interests. Meanwhile, foreign affairs posed another challenge for the nascent nation. The French Revolution erupted across the Atlantic in 1789, igniting fervor for liberty and democracy among Americans. Jefferson, now serving as Secretary of State, sympathized with the revolutionary cause and advocated for a policy of neutrality in the face of European conflicts. Washington, however, navigated a delicate diplomatic course, seeking to maintain cordial relations with both Britain and France while safeguarding American interests. The Jay Treaty of 1794, negotiated by Chief Justice John Jay, exemplified Washington's pragmatic approach to foreign policy. The treaty sought to resolve lingering issues with Britain, including trade disputes and the presence of British troops in the Northwest Territory. While controversial and unpopular among some Americans, the Jay Treaty averted war and preserved peace with Britain, a crucial achievement for the young republic. Domestically, the United States expanded westward, driven by the pioneering spirit and economic opportunities offered by vast tracts of land. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 established a framework for admitting new states into the Union and prohibiting slavery in the Northwest Territory, a significant step toward addressing the moral and political implications of slavery. In the realm of diplomacy, Washington's farewell address in 1796 provided a guiding vision for the nation's foreign relations and domestic unity. Warned against entangling alliances and partisan divisions, Washington emphasized the importance of national unity and civic virtue, a message that resonated throughout the years to come. As the chapter draws to a close, the reader gains a deeper understanding of the challenges and triumphs that shaped the early years of the United States. From the establishment of a federal government to the formulation of economic policies and the navigation of foreign affairs, the founding era set the course for a nation striving to uphold its ideals of liberty, democracy, and unity. The leadership of George Washington and the vision of the Founding Fathers laid a foundation upon which the United States would grow and evolve, forging a path toward its place as a beacon of freedom in the world. Chapter 8: The First Test of Unity. The dawn of the 19th century saw the United States grappling with its first major internal conflict since independence, the Whiskey Rebellion. The new nation, still in its infancy, was facing a crucial test of its authority and ability to maintain order while balancing the ideals of liberty that had fueled its birth. The year was 1791, and Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury, had proposed an excise tax on distilled spirits as part of his plan to stabilize the national economy. The tax was intended to help pay off the war debt and establish the financial credibility of the federal government. However, the tax was deeply unpopular, especially among frontier farmers in western Pennsylvania who converted their surplus grain into whiskey. For these farmers, whiskey was not just a product but a form of currency and a symbol of their independence. As the tax collectors arrived in the frontier regions, resistance quickly mounted. Farmers saw the tax as an unjust burden imposed by a distant government that had little understanding of their daily struggles. The resentment boiled over into acts of defiance and violence. Tax collectors were harassed, tarred and feathered, and their property destroyed. By 1794, the resistance had escalated into a full-blown rebellion. The small town of Braddocksfield became the epicenter of the conflict. In July of that year, a large group of armed farmers, led by Revolutionary War veteran David Bradford, gathered to protest the tax. The sight of so many armed men, their faces set with determination, was a stark reminder of the revolutionary fervor that had only recently won America its independence. The farmers marched on Pittsburgh, a center of federal authority in the region, demanding the repeal of the tax and the removal of tax collectors. President George Washington, recognizing the rebellion as a serious threat to the authority of the federal government, decided to act decisively. He believed that the new republic could not afford to let such defiance go unchallenged. Washington issued a proclamation calling for the rebels to disperse and return to their homes. When this was met with defiance, he invoked the Militia Acts of 1792, calling up a militia force from several states. In September 1794, Washington personally led an army of nearly 13,000 militiamen into western Pennsylvania, the first and only time a sitting U.S. president has led troops in the field. The sight of the formidable force, led by the revered figure of Washington himself, had a profound impact. The rebels, realizing the futility of their resistance against such overwhelming odds, quickly dispersed. By the time Washington and his troops arrived in the rebellious areas, the insurrection had largely dissipated. The leaders of the rebellion, including David Bradford, fled or were captured. While a few were tried for treason, most were pardoned by Washington, who sought to balance justice with reconciliation. The Whiskey Rebellion was effectively quashed, and the authority of the federal government was firmly established. This episode was a significant test of the young nation's ability to enforce its laws and maintain order. It underscored the importance of a strong central government capable of exercising its authority while also highlighting the ongoing tension between federal power and states' rights, a theme that would continue to shape American politics. As the chapter concludes, the reader is left with a deep appreciation for the challenges faced by the United States in its formative years. The Whiskey Rebellion demonstrated the complexities of governance in a nation built on principles of liberty and resistance to tyranny. It also reinforced the notion that the survival of the Republic depended on the delicate balance between maintaining order and respecting the rights and freedoms of its citizens. In the aftermath of the rebellion, the United States emerged stronger and more unified, with a renewed commitment to the principles of justice and governance that would guide its future. The early leaders of the nation, through their actions and decisions, laid the groundwork for a resilient republic capable of weathering the storms of internal conflict and emerging stronger on the other side. Chapter 9: Expansion and Tension. The turn of the 19th century brought with it the promise of growth and opportunity for the United States. The young nation, still finding its footing, looked westward with eager eyes, seeing vast lands ripe for settlement and development. This chapter chronicles the period of westward expansion, marked by both incredible ambition and significant conflict. The year was 1803, and President Thomas Jefferson, a staunch advocate for agrarian expansion and the ideals of the Republic, orchestrated one of the most significant land deals in history, the Louisiana Purchase. For $15 million, the United States acquired approximately 827,000 square miles of territory from France, effectively doubling the size of the nation. The vast expanse of land, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, presented boundless opportunities for exploration and settlement. Jefferson tasked Meriwether Lewis and William Clark with leading an expedition to explore the newly acquired territory. The Lewis and Clark expedition, also known as the Corps of Discovery, embarked from St. Louis in May 1804, navigating the Missouri River and forging a path through the uncharted wilderness. The journey was arduous and fraught with challenges, from harsh weather and rugged terrain to encounters with Native American tribes. However, it was also a journey of discovery, revealing the rich biodiversity and expansive landscapes of the American West. Among the most significant encounters during the expedition was with Sacagawea, a Shoshone woman who, along with her husband Toussaint Charbonneau, served as a guide and interpreter. Sacagawea's knowledge of the land and her diplomatic skills proved invaluable to the expedition, helping to establish peaceful relations with various Native American tribes. Her presence symbolized the intersection of cultures and the complex dynamics of westward expansion. As the expedition returned in 1806, their reports sparked a wave of enthusiasm for westward migration. Settlers, driven by the promise of fertile land and new opportunities, began to move into the territories acquired through the Louisiana Purchase. However, this movement was not without its consequences. The westward expansion encroached upon the lands of numerous Native American tribes, leading to tensions and conflicts. The Shawnee leader Tecumseh emerged as a formidable figure during this period, advocating for united Native American resistance against the encroaching settlers. Tecumseh, along with his brother Tenskwatawa, known as the Prophet, sought to create a confederation of tribes to protect their lands and way of life. The resistance movement gained momentum, culminating in the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811. The battle, fought in present-day Indiana, pitted Tecumseh's Confederation against American forces led by then-Governor William Henry Harrison. The clash resulted in heavy losses for the Native American forces, weakening their resistance but not their resolve. Meanwhile, the United States faced external threats as well. The War of 1812, often called the Second War of Independence, erupted as tensions with Britain reached a boiling point. Issues such as impressment of American sailors, restrictions on American trade, and British support for Native American resistance fueled the conflict. The war saw significant battles on both land and sea, with iconic moments such as the burning of Washington, D.C., and the defense of Fort McHenry, which inspired Francis Scott Key to write the Star-Spangled Banner. The Treaty of Ghent, signed in December 1814, effectively ended the war and restored pre-war boundaries, but it did not address all the underlying issues. Nevertheless, the war fostered a sense of national pride and identity, with the United States emerging more confident in its sovereignty and place on the world stage.
The post-war period, known as the Era of Good Feelings, was marked by a sense of national unity and optimism. President James Monroe's administration oversaw a period of economic growth and territorial expansion, including the acquisition of Florida from Spain through the Adams-on-Este Treaty in 1819. However, beneath the surface of national unity, significant tensions simmered. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 exemplified the growing sectional divide over the issue of slavery. The admission of Missouri as a slave state threatened to upset the delicate balance between slave and free states. The compromise, brokered by Henry Clay, allowed Missouri to enter the Union as a slave state while Maine entered as a free state, maintaining the balance. Additionally, it prohibited slavery in the Louisiana Territory north of the 3630s latitude line. This temporary solution highlighted the deepening rift between North and South, a conflict that would continue to escalate in the years to come. As the chapter draws to a close, the reader is left with a vivid picture of a nation in motion. The expansion and tension of the early 19th century set the stage for future conflicts and developments, shaping the United States into a complex and dynamic society. The ambition and determination of the American people drove the nation's growth, but the journey was fraught with challenges and contradictions, reflecting the enduring struggle to balance ideals of liberty and justice with the realities of a diverse and expanding republic. Chapter 10: The Age of Jackson. The early 19th century ushered in a new era of American politics, defined by the rise of Andrew Jackson, a man whose name would come to symbolize both the potential and perils of democratic expansion. Known as Old Hickory for his rugged demeanor and unyielding spirit, Jackson's ascent to the presidency marked a turning point in the nation's history, reflecting the growing influence of the common man in American politics. The year was 1828, and the presidential election was one of the most contentious in American history. Jackson, a war hero from the Battle of New Orleans and a staunch advocate for the common people, ran against the incumbent John Quincy Adams. The campaign was brutal, with both sides hurling personal attacks and accusations. Jackson supporters painted Adams as an elitist out of touch with the American people,
while Adams' camp depicted Jackson as a hot-tempered and unfit leader. In the end, Jackson's populist appeal and promises of reform resonated with voters, leading to a decisive victory. Jackson's inauguration was a spectacle of unprecedented scale, drawing thousands of enthusiastic supporters to Washington, D.C. The celebration, however, quickly descended into chaos as throngs of people flooded the White House, breaking furniture and damaging the property in their fervor to celebrate with their new president. This wild scene underscored the dramatic shift in political power from the elite to the masses, heralding the dawn of Jacksonian democracy. One of Jackson's first major actions as president was to implement the controversial spoils system, rewarding loyal supporters with government positions. While Jackson argued that this practice democratized government by rotating office holders, critics decried it as corrupt and inefficient, accusing him of prioritizing loyalty over competence. Jackson's presidency was defined by several key issues, none more contentious than the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Jackson, driven by a vision of American expansion, pushed for the relocation of Native American tribes living east of the Mississippi River to lands west of the river. Despite legal resistance and the landmark Supreme Court case Worcester v. Georgia, which ruled in favor of the Cherokee Nation, Jackson pressed ahead with his policy. The ensuing forced migrations, most notoriously the Trail of Tears, resulted in the suffering and death of thousands of Native Americans, casting a dark shadow over Jackson's legacy. Economic policy also played a central role in Jackson's administration. A fierce opponent of the Second Bank of the United States, Jackson viewed the institution as a bastion of privilege and corruption. In a dramatic showdown, Jackson vetoed the renewal of the bank's charter and subsequently withdrew federal deposits, redistributing them to state banks, derisively termed peat banks by his critics. This move destabilized the national economy and led to a series of financial crises, culminating in the Panic of 1837, which left many Americans facing severe economic hardship. Amidst these domestic challenges, Jackson's presidency also saw significant developments in foreign policy. His administration navigated complex relations with European powers and promoted American interests abroad. Notably, Jackson successfully negotiated the Treaty of 1831 with France, securing reparations for damages incurred during the Napoleonic Wars. Jackson's influence extended beyond his presidency, shaping the political landscape for years to come. The Democratic Party, which he helped to solidify, became a dominant force in American politics, championing the cause of the common man and advocating for a limited federal government. However, Jackson's legacy was also marked by deep divisions and controversy, with his policies often sparking fierce opposition and debate. One of the most enduring impacts of Jackson's presidency was the crystallization of sectional tensions, particularly over the issue of slavery. The nullification crisis of 1832–1833, sparked by South Carolina's rejection of federal tariffs, highlighted the growing divide between the North and South. Jackson's firm stance against nullification and his willingness to use military force to uphold federal authority preserved the Union in the short term, but foreshadowed the conflicts that would eventually lead to the Civil War. As the chapter concludes, the reader is left with a complex portrait of Andrew Jackson and his era. Jackson's presidency was a time of profound change, characterized by the expansion of democracy and the assertion of federal authority, but also marred by policies that inflicted great suffering and deepened national divisions. The age of Jackson was a defining period in American history, setting the stage for the tumultuous decades to come and leaving an indelible mark on the nation's political and social fabric. The narrative of Jackson's presidency with its triumphs and tribulations, offers a vivid glimpse into the challenges of leadership and the ongoing struggle to balance the ideals of democracy with the realities of governance. It serves as a reminder of the enduring complexities and contradictions that have shaped the American experience, reflecting both the nation's potential for greatness and its capacity for profound error.